All right, we'll call the meeting to order. The one thing we got briefly here is a quick little discussion and vote on the build-out for the master plan. I don't know, Bill, have you heard anything about that?
No, not yet.
Okay. I'm on the planning board as well, and every 10 or so years we put a master plan together. The town kind of uses to kind of guide as the way zoning ordinances are written and followed, okay. and kind of the trend of the town's philosophy and wants, desires, things like that. There'll be a survey that will go out in a couple of weeks, actually probably a couple of months now. And all the townspeople will collect data, and the company that puts the data collector presents it to the town, we have to hire.
Okay. And
we had three proposals. One of them was North Country Council, Maine Nemo, and FB Environmental. And I'm just reading from the minutes here. The Nemo was about $18,000. I think they budgeted $12 for it, if I'm not mistaken. So it was a little outside the price range of what we wanted to spend. North Country Council was obviously local, and Maine obviously is not. They were about $8,500. They do have some additional items that you can pay for to expand their presentation as much as you want. And then this FB Environmental was submitted by Forrest Bell, and there was $8,700, and then there were add-ons for that one. So based on a vote on by the planning board, they wanted to pick North Country Council as the company that's going to do the build-out for the master plan. And what we have to do is, discuss that a little bit and approve that if we so choose to.
Okay.
And we're done with that. So, anybody care to make a motion to accept North Country Council as the proposed contract for the build-out?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on that?
I read the minutes. It seemed like it was pretty unanimous that that's what the planning board wanted to do, and they come in under budget, and so it seemed pretty straightforward to me.
It was, to be quite honest, there were two that were close, and North County Council is, again, local. They've, we work with them here, obviously, in the valley, so we kind of went with them. So, any further discussion?
I don't know.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? All right. And I guess take a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
And all those in favor?
Aye.
All righty. And now we're into the work session. And I guess, obviously we got to come up with the job description for the building. These are double doors. I'm just trying to get my act together here. Those are the three proposals.
Okay.
For the building inspector. And why am I not putting my hands on that stuff?
Is it in front of you?
Might not. Let's put it down. I had it in my hand. Excuse me for a second. And so we want to get that started with, I guess. Well, I want to spend about an hour doing that. I think my paper's in here.
Your house on Passaconn.
It is.
We were doing a bike ride, so
Oh, no, that's a house I'm building on that. So I...
By the way, Bob, this is your mail.
I'm over on Kenneth Street, but the house... Yeah, I'm told that. Log home. Yes. So, it's getting started, so... Yeah.
Pass that on to you for your information. All right, so what I did was I went through the present building permit and kind of looked that over and asked Andy to come in because I had a couple of questions. One thing I noticed, Andy, I talked about a little project I was going to do at my house, and just putting changing the siding around my house a little bit, fix some water damage I have on the shingles.
Yeah.
That would require a building permit?
If you're replacing siding, that would not be a...
Because when I was reading through this, I'm
So
saying,
if you're doing minor repairs, it's really, you know, it's when we start looking at structural things that you want to, or electrical, plumbing, you know.
that's why, you know, that was my understanding when I talked to you about it.
Yeah, if you're, I would suggest if you're replacing a couple of clapboards and not getting into, you know, sometimes we'll have, someone says, well, we're just replacing a couple pieces of siding, and then it's, you know,
Can't work.
it ends up being, yeah,
Still.
a structural
Right,
issue,
right.
right. But, yeah, I would suggest if you're,
If you can find the building, but, you know, it said in the building permit application on page 6, it says the building permit application must be submitted for all projects.
right.
So would I have to submit a,
So in what the previous...
that's what confused me about
Yeah,
that.
what the previous board had done is, in fact, it was an entirely different board. They had said that they wanted a building permit application coming in for everything because they figured that made it cleaner. And we wouldn't collect fees for it or even an application fee if there was no permit issued.
So I would have to fill out this whole thing just to replace,
You know, if you...
technically, I mean, just to follow the way it's written.
Correct, yes, yeah.
I mean, that was,
And following that with you, is that something we want to continue? It just sounds a little bit, you know, if you're replacing clapboards, you want to fill that out to go get...
I would suggest that it's probably overkill to have to do that for a minor project. But, you know, I think we need to come up with a definition of what a minor project is. And, you know, I think that, you know, there are some times when we have, in fact, there was a recent issue with not wanting, they were going to do just siding. Well, then it turned into siding and windows. And they, you know, we had a discussion about the, you know, the need for different types of windows when you're replacing glazing, like over bathtubs, it has to be tempered, and stairways, it has to be tempered. So, and there's no way to have that discussion without having a building permit. You know, somebody would have to come in and we'd have to be notified of the job, because there's no way that, you know, I don't think anybody could ride around and police this stuff.
no, I know, it's self-policing, really, thank you.
In really what happens is, you're dealing, homeowners are dealing with contractors that, you know, sometimes may not pull permits and may not be up to speed onto, you know, these potential life safety issues. So there's a fine line between being, you know, overly invasive with the permits, and then, you know, because, you know, anybody that's been involved with, you know, plate glass shattering into, you know, a tub enclosure, you know, when they find out that, geez, that should have been tempered glass, you know, it's a big difference, you know. So, in getting to have that discussion before the window goes in, it's not a bad idea.
Just a question then, let's assume he's putting up 2 pieces of clapboard.
Yeah.
But he doesn't fill out the report.
Yeah.
And the neighbor turns them in,
Right.
what are you going to do to them? Or what's going to happen to them?
Well, the current process is that there's a, you know, that the neighbor, whoever's making the complaint has to come in and give a written complaint.
Okay, well, let's say we do the...
So if that happens, and, you know, in town, and the town asked me to go out there, and truly it's just replacing a couple of clapboards, there's no issue. There's nothing to do. But if you go out there and you find out that, you know, replacing a couple of clapboards is, you know, now a new deck and, you know, just a small addition, you know, that's, you know.
Wouldn't, just out of curiosity, comes back to my thing about the dog license. Okay. If you say, you know, that a person's going to put on 2 clapboards, but by the way, you got to fill out this, how many pages is that? 4?
Well, it's 7.
7 pages.
Yeah.
I mean,
Not all is filled out.
No.
So
why would you fill it out at all? Why don't you just say, I'm only doing 2 clapboards? I'm not filling that out. I think you would not have a bunch of them filled out, so what's going to happen.
Well,
Not you, I'm blabbing you.
Sure, and, you know, and whenever anybody, and the town staff's really good about, you know, if anybody has questions, I'll get the phone call. Andy, what, you know, we're just replacing a couple of clapboards, you know, does this require a building permit? And so, and, you know, we talk about the project, and it's often, the answer is no. or it's, well, we're only replacing a couple of clappers, and by the way, we're, you know, it's around the electrical service and we're replacing the electrical service. But it's having that discussion that, you know,
You need to have it.
you have to have that discussion. And it seems to work pretty well because, you know, the current staff is pretty good about saying, give Andy a call. You know, my number is on your website. So, and people, you know, are all, they're pretty technologically savvy. You know, they look it up and call. So it's,
What if you said on the same report where it says, you know, you have to do everything? If you said on there, it says, if you have any questions, call the local building inspector and he will help you determine whether you need to fill this out or not.
sure. And I mean, that really is what happens now. It's, you know, you know, everybody knows that they're required to have a building permit, and then, you know, they come in and they look at this thing and they'll say, well, this doesn't really apply to me, and they'll call and ask questions, and, you know, it's, sometimes it really
Okay.
doesn't apply.
I'll shut up.
So it seems to be working pretty well, though, as far as you're concerned. I mean, as opposed versus the old method.
Yeah, you know, it's, I know we've talked about, you know, going to multiple permits. Many towns do that. They'll have a permit for gas, and a permit for electrical, and a permit for plumbing, and in minor work, and then, you know, additions and work outside of the footprint. To me, that, you know, I think the consensus at the time had gotten that it was a little bit too much. It becomes just too much paperwork for a small town. So this is kind of the amalgamation of, you know.
So do you try and permit to replace your shingles or metal roof?
Roofing, because it's an inspected item, you're supposed to have a permit for that. And the past board said, oh, we're not going to do roofs. And I've been involved in a couple of real estate inspections that have new roofs locally that had somebody looked at what was going on, they wouldn't have the problems that they're having now. So I think that the roof, it's not a bad idea to require a permit for that. It's pretty easy to address flashing while the guys are there doing the roof versus finding out that there's a problem afterwards. So I think that it's probably not a bad idea.
Yes, I was thinking about the roofs.
And on the list of inspections here, and that's pretty much a complete list.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in general, I mean, you know, I'm just asking for a ballpark figure. So, you know, they do the formula that you had in there, and they did a sample.
Yeah.
And you know, on a soup to nuts type situation where you're starting from ground zero and to the finished product, how many visits do you tend to make on a particular project?
It really depends on the project, and it depends on the builder, the contractor. I mean, there's, you know, there's a new house that's going up, and I've made 7 visits to the site, and we're not even through the rough framing yet. So it really, you know, some of them go quite smoothly, you know, and it's, you know, it's 5 trips out there. This one, we don't even have the rough frame up, and it's.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I'm a little concerned that we might run out of money for the funds that we collected in terms of the fees. You know, if you're making 11 trips out there and we haven't got the rough framing up, you're going to make 11 more, and now we're over the budget.
The arrangement that I had with the previous board is that I only get paid when there is a building permit to act on. So, you know, if somebody is calling for, you know, for advice or before they issue a permit, that's, you know, that's my time. You know, if this permit, there is a provision so that if the town is expending more funds than they've taken in on the building permit fees, we can ask for reimbursement from the applicant. That's never happened. I don't believe we've ever run over on inspection costs because I don't bill for it.
Yeah.
You know, if I'm very cognizant of not going over, and usually often there's a small surplus that will help offset. You know, so while one job may take 5 visits, another one may take 12. It tends to come out in the wash. So my billing ratio, my time versus what I invoice the town, I'm getting reimbursed for just under a third of the amount of time I spend on Jackson. So, that's my previous agreement, and I have continued to honor that till today, and will continue to. But unless we want to change the format, to me it seems like it's something that in previous inspectors that you folks have had, there truly has been there's been some pretty hefty cost overruns. And they would have been more onerous if the town hadn't won a lawsuit that put money into that kitty for the previous inspector to draw out of. Right. And but so far, I mean, I think the budget's working pretty well.
The way a couple of people had some concerns about, like, say something went, hunky-dory, say you had a $700 building permit fee. Person A, gets 3 visits or whatever is needed, and they're done, and they go great, and and they spend, oh geez, I probably got $300 worth of inspections. I overpaid by $400 in theory. Sure. And somebody else gets 11 inspections, and they're over budget, and so Jimmy sees Paul and say, hey, geez, what's the equity in this?
Right.
And that was probably my concern, is that I would like to see maybe the inspection fee be more at a per visit cost, so that way that the person who's really taxing your time gets hit, as opposed to somebody who was doing everything up and up properly.
Sure, and that's if that's what we want to, I'm pretty amenable. I've been some folks have it's more challenging. Sometimes it's tougher, and I try to help those folks out. And
I know you do a great job. It's one thing I love about you.
But so I don't know that I'd feel good punishing somebody for calling and asking for help. Right. To me, that just seems like it's a recipe for for not getting the call and having something go wrong. I personally would rather have someone call and ask the question than try to straighten it out after the fact.
Right. You have anything else about the permit you want to go?
As far as the permit, not really. It seemed like when we looked at the permit a year ago and made some very minor changes.
I think we talked about eliminating the $10,000 exemption. I don't know if that's come out of that permit yet.
I hope so.
Yeah, so I know we were burning up some old permits, and we had some online that the link was still coming up with the old building. Yeah, so but I think that might have been changed now.
Yeah, I don't see it here.
But there are a few things that we can tweak. Some of the check box, the lines for foundations are pretty vague. There's some other building materials and insulation like foam that spray foam insulation is becoming a more popular thing. So that probably ought to go in the box.
Oh, I know. What about wells? Who determines the well situation? Somebody asked me about that.
That's reviewed with septic permit. So when Bert takes a look at that, he's looking at the well protective radius around that. So yeah, that's not.
Harley, you had interest obviously in this. Do you have anything you wanted to add or put in on that?
No, the only thing I just was picking up on though was, and I agree with you that if somebody requires more inspections, they should have to pay, especially if there's a contractor that seems to be, or one particular contractor that seems to be requiring more inspections than a different contractor. I think that somehow they should pay more. I just think it's only fair.
Joan?
When we built in Connecticut, you had a flat rate for your building inspection, which included, your foundation, your rough plumbing, I think there were like 4 inspections. If you required more than that, there was a surcharge for the building inspector to come out. So you try to meet your 4, because that wasn't what was in the permit, and beyond that, there was a surcharge.
And I think what Andy's saying is that, the fee itself averages out to cover itself, but there are, certain people that draw more attention than others, I guess. And,
Those were
the
visits.
question-
You could always make phone calls, or we could go into the town offices and meet with them there with no additional charge. But if you had to come back out beyond the 4 on the checklist, then it was a surcharge.
Anything about the fees or anything?
Well, I just felt probably all along that once we, solidified the whole position, that we're probably going to need to go back and tweak in some way, shape, or form. I mean, I think it was like May or June last year when we brought in building permits from other towns. And I still remember they were kind of couched in the terms of these are towns that do it right.
Those were the towns that Jerry had emailed us all saying that as we're looking through this process, in his mind, these are the towns that do things the right way. And I'm a member of the New Hampshire Buildings Officials, and most towns do things, their building permit, there's nothing standardized as far as
Right.
building permits go. The larger towns tend to have more paperwork. The larger town, and that's because they have multiple inspectors. So the permit comes in, the mechanical guy gets a permit, the electrical inspector gets a permit. So it tends to, Concord is, Concord mentioned, that's where we start seeing lots of permits. And then when you get inspectors that have come from those larger towns, that's when they tend to bring that with them. And that's, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's just different.
Well, I think that's the point, that there might be other towns that have a wonderful permit structure, but that doesn't guarantee that it's going to fit Jackson and the whatever it is we do a year, 40, 45 permits a year. It just seems like when we poured through this and tried to come up with changes, I think we kind of minimized some of the things with it that we thought we wanted to change, and we kept the same basic format. But it seemed, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, that all of this felt like when we, after we got through next March, assuming we did get through next March, and we did, we were going to want to maybe take a good hard look at, is this format easy enough to understand? And I think, just as you've heard me say several times, I really like getting the selectmen somewhat out of this process. It's just felt like this rubber stamp that is a useless step in the process. That I also think that it's probably a good idea to have a permit that's understandable to the point where we can get the town office somewhat out of this also. I mean, I don't know that either one of them know any more about building permits than I do, and I shouldn't be a gatekeeper. So I think, so if it's not so complicated, because it was like, well, if a project is this and a project is that, and I thought, well, right off the bat, the word should be work, so that somebody's not like, well, what is a project? And just really try and, I don't want to say simplify, because it's not super complicated right now, but where somebody can come in and easily understand that if it's not clear, where they can go for clarification.
So where the town has adopted the state building code, And for residential homes, it's the International Residential Code, the IRC, which is, yes, John's right on it. Which, you know, the nice thing is that all of the states surrounding us, in fact, most of the country, and now a lot of the free world uses the same ICC codes. You know, a contractor building in Massachusetts should be very familiar with this document. It is not something that should be foreign to them. In the front of that code book, it gives you a list of what a permit is required for. And, you know, and I know that we've been over this, and I know the planning board's been over this. And I've killed the national forest with, you know, with the amount of copies that I've made of that document. But I mean, to me, it seems pretty simple. We've adopted the state building code. This is the state building code. The state building code tells us when a permit is required, what work is necessitating a permit, and what inspections are required. I'm not sure that, you know, I don't know that reinventing the wheel is, you know, I don't think it's necessary. You know.
Do you think the permit then should refer to that book? Or is that?
Oh,
It does.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
So-
as far as, if I come in as
Right.
as someone getting ready to start work, am I supposed to be able to understand from the permit what I need an application for? Or am I supposed to be referenced to the book, which
Right.
looks daunting to me? Or am I
So-
supposed to call the...
So what I've done for town staff, I mean, it's written in pretty plain language. So what I have done is I have copied that section, and town staff's had it for quite a while now. And anybody that has a question, they're able to reference that and say,
Yes or no.
here it is. And if you don't understand it, you can give Andy a call. And that's what happened. That's
how it's worked.
It is, and it seems like that's, you know, it's kind of like adopting. Well, it is. It's adopting the state building code and then saying, well, we're going to amend this and we're going to amend that, and you know, and then pretty soon it's, you know, a contractor can't go and say, okay, I'm looking at my code book, which would be lovely if they all had them. But they look at the code book and they say, okay, here's a permit that's required. You know, Jackson's a town that enforces the state building code. This is what I have to do. You know, so it is. It's, to me, it's pretty clear.
Okay.
You know.
Do you know where that job description is in here?
Yeah, it's right in the, it is in the front. In fact, I think it's even before the permit required section.
Really?
It gives you the description of the building inspector and the duties and roles and responsibilities.
I think it's referring to page 3, where it talks about duties and powers.
Okay. So we just have to basically rewrite this in some kind of template that's similar to what we've used for the other ones then.
Yeah, well, as I was, looking at that and trying to make the connection on right, where that matched up with the template we got, some of it's just like right on the money, and then...
Is there anything from LGC?
Andy, do you know who Property Liability Trust is? Property Liability Trust.
No.
That's the former LGC.
Oh, okay, so it's that old.
No, that's new.
That's new?
Property Liability Trust is their new name.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
LGC is divided into 3, New Hampshire Municipal Society,
When did that
the
happen?
Property Liability Trust, and the Health Trust.
When did that happen?
When they reorganized it, this last 2-3 months.
Wow.
And so this was
So it's fresh.
updated in April of 12 is basically what it says. But, do you inspect test pits for septic systems?
No, that's per, you already have
Yeah,
an engineer that does
because
that.
it's in here.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, there are things that,
They're in there that need to be taken out.
and that's the way it was with all of them.
Right.
There might be,
And that's a building inspector one right there?
yep,
Can we print that one out?
yep. I don't
Is
have,
it already printed in the folder that you were gonna give him? I think Julie had some of that stuff ready. You
I didn't
brought
get
in
a
Bob's
folder.
stuff.
is there a folder?
I handed,
She handed you that.
Oh, that was in my mailbox. What's this? Yeah, it's probably in here. And how do you kind of marry it? She
Right.
printed everybody.
that's pretty close one.
Yeah, and this is what I'm looking at. Technical administrative support to the planning board and zoning board of adjustment. Do you do that? Okay,
Yes.
and that's not anywhere on page 3,
I know.
is it?
Crap,
Is that
don't read
in
it.
the,
It is not,
It is not. See, that's the thing,
So-
we need to make sure that
right.
two lists jive.
yeah, and so when it talked about the scope and powers or duties and powers, it was a little bit different than some of the essential duties outlined in here, and I think that between the two, we could probably come up with a document that...
Well, the powers here probably wouldn't be part of the job description. I mean, that would be something that, you know,
No, it wouldn't.
that's be his, lawful given duties, right?
Right. And essential duties, because we haven't settled that these essential duties wouldn't necessarily be in the form of a job description unless we went the route of hiring somebody to work for the town, but they would be contained in a contract that we would enter into.
Right.
And that's how, what's your company? What's the name of your company?
Chalmers Building Services.
Yeah, so if we entered into a contract, for example, with Chalmers Building Services, they would be responsible for these duties being performed. But it wouldn't necessarily be Andy responsible, it would be the business responsible.
Mhm.
But they would still need to, be reflected in the contract.
Do you have a contract with
And
you?
say, we need to,
I think it's been a handshake agreement with
yeah.
the previous board. That should-
Bill has a copy of the minutes from that meeting where he was hired.
Yeah.
So whether it's a job description for a town employee or a contract with a business, I mean, yeah, these types of things and what's in there that hasn't been reflected in this, those are the things we want to have documented, in my mind,
Mhm.
so that everybody's clear on what their duties are and are not.
And what about the town employee status too? What about that? Do we have to, do we subcontract or do we have to do the town employee gambit?
Well, I think that we can do whatever works best for Jackson. As far as the surrounding towns, Conway, Madison, Albany, Freedom, Alton, Barrington, they have people they consider to be employees. And it looks like Albany's kind of a per diem basis, and then you can always have an employee that's on a per diem basis. So, I don't see that designation as changing anything necessarily at all that Andy does, as far as when he shows up, what he does, when he goes home.
It might be financial things for the town though, right? Like,
Could you do it the same way that we did when we had to change Martha from an contractor to an employee? She submits her bill like she used to, but it's just paid
Yeah,
through
there's-
payroll instead.
Ways they do this, and so
You get,
The upside of, I think, a contract is that you enter into an agreement, and most of the contracts that we've come across here are one-year contracts that we end up renewing on a yearly basis, or not renewing on a yearly basis. And it's with the business, and the business is responsible for making this work, and just so that's different than hiring someone and putting someone on payroll, even if it's as a 1099 type. That's what Martha is, right?
She's not 1099 anymore, she is an employee.
She's an employee. She wasn't a
Wasn't.
She
subcontractor
was a 1099 contractor.
for services, and now she's an employee. So, to me, the important piece, whether we go forward as contracting with a business or that we hire somebody and they work for the town as an employee, what we need to do now that we've gotten through March and gotten the support of the voters that we want is to document, have this stuff formalized so everybody is clear. It's you can get away with a handshake agreement for a little bit, but we're kind of, I hope we see ourselves as growing out of that, because the day's going to come where something that's not written down and understood clearly by both parties is going to cause a rift. And Andy's here today, but if he wins the lottery tomorrow,
Andy's gone.
what are we going to do? Shake somebody else's hand? That doesn't necessarily know the town, hasn't
Sure.
been through the learning curve, isn't clear on what's expected. So all of these things, I think, to me, hopefully encourage us to have something that's clear and understood and written and signed off on by both parties.
And as far as a timetable for that, I would like to do it, at the end of my term, at least. That way we can start the new board.
Start well.
What, in terms of, if we're going to do a contract thing with whoever we hire, theoretically it's Andy now, so.
Mm-hmm.
But, in terms of, making it formal,
Mm-hmm.
I think that, will give us enough time to get all our ducks in a row instead of trying to rush through it,
Uh-huh.
not do it right, and maybe rub some people the wrong way, and just kind of, 'cause I don't think anything, the card isn't broken. I don't think. I think, I think it's working well. I mean, I don't think there's any super duper push to, change anything. But at the same token, I do agree that I think that, it does need to be more formalized in terms of a contract and job description in terms, and that all set up properly, and do it right, instead of, if it was something that was really violently wrong, we need to change it right away. But, in terms of doing it right, taking our time, I think we can do that by the end of my term. I mean, is there any rush to, I think...
I have no, I'm not in any rush.
Okay.
And so, I have no problem with being
That
slow
way we get
and
it.
deliberate, and, there may even be a point where we feel like we've got something that's along the lines of a final draft that we...
I do agree. I think somewhere along the line it needs to be contracted. I think it's somewhere along the line you have to have some kind of formal contract, I think.
I would prefer to go through this process rather than going through a new board again, because this process has been, it's been quite lengthy.
Yeah, I know.
It seems like every year
We've made a lot of major changes. I think we're done with
I thought we
minor
were good
ones.
with, right, I thought we were all set, come last spring. So I just, rather than wait for, a new board, I would, if we're going to do something, whether it's put it back out to bid or interview, or, I would prefer to do that sooner rather than later, if it matters to you guys. I just soon not, have another, a new board and have to pick this up again.
Well, it may or may not be a new board, but
Yeah.
I certainly understand you're wanting to have some of this stuff settled, now that we've, had the voters sign off on that. What do you, so, there's a little bit of a disconnect here between you two. What do you, what would be the upside of waiting that you?
I wasn't trying to wait, I just wanted to progress slowly.
Okay.
In other words, I want to make sure, that we investigate the town employee versus the per diem status.
Mhm.
Get a contract set up, get the job description done, which would tie into the contract, instead of trying to throw everything together in a month,
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more on that. I
Yeah.
don't think we want to,
I think there's some questions still to be answered. I think the job description obviously is the first thing we want to get done. This is a great start right here, since give us time to look this over and maybe we get copies of these things and maybe marry those two together and have a second one and see where we go from there. We can find out about the. Do you have a preference as far as town employee versus per diem? Does it matter to you? It probably wouldn't make that much difference
It
one
really
way or the other.
doesn't matter to me one way or the other. I think, it seems like it's added labor burden for the town.
I would think so.
And it just, to me, it doesn't. I mean, I'm no financial genius, otherwise I, probably wouldn't be sitting here. But, but it's still, it seems like it doesn't take a giant leap to figure out that labor burden on having an employee
Right.
is considerably more than what's going on right now.
Huntley, maybe?
Oh, I agree. I mean, I think that we should be trying to keep the costs down.
Right.
And I'm always uneasy when you start putting an inspector as a full-time town employee, because once he's an employee, to me, it means that depending on and I am comfortable with our select board, who is on the select board, that they could put undue pressure for friends or something that they didn't agree with, and I guess that would cause
Well, that could
controversy.
be true with the yearly contract too. We say, hey, yeah, we got a new board of my buddies, coming up for a renewal, and that could work that way too.
Yeah.
well, I don't think anybody's talking about this translating into more work, more hours, or more strict supervision on what day you work or what time you don't work or anything like, or anybody for that matter work. I was talking to Andy earlier this week, and I felt like a downside of the current situation where there's really nothing in place as far as a contract or a job description with a town employee or anything would be the worst of all three, because that truly is subject. I mean, we could just basically say, give out this phone number and want that phone number, and who could do anything about it? And there's this little job security with this current situation as any that I could really come up with. And then a contract could possibly be more subject to the whim of the makeup of any current board. You don't see employees come and go at the end of elections, but if it works out that you've got, I think you structure it so that there's liability, workers' comp, and everything else. But for example, if you're dealing with somebody who's got a business, he's got his insurance. He's got all of his liability stuff lined up in a row. And I think for me, as little as I know about really the differences, that stuff ends up falling on the town when it's an employee, and it becomes our responsibility to get all of those things lined up, as opposed to contracting out to a business who then is responsible for doing all that. But it's really, maybe in some, I think it's more of a 6 in one way and a half dozen in the other. I don't see it as a major in that position, but there are some subtle differences. If he's got a business, and let's say that that business for building services ends up inspecting homes and gets contracted with other towns, and he's got a contract with this one, and then he's an employee with this one, and so he's got to have insurance in place for this town and not for the other town, and I could see it being difficult for a business to do business as both entities. But whatever should shape, I think the ultimate decision is what's in the best interest of the town. And it's interesting. I really don't know why Madison and Albany and Conway and Freedom and Alton and Barrington all have this person as a town employee. I don't know what the upside is.
Yeah. Anybody in our size, though, I mean, those are pretty.
That's a big town.
Those are bigger towns compared to us.
Albany, Eaton.
Well, Albany is per diem, but he is an employee.
So Albany is,
Free and
I
employee
have
part-time.
dealt with the Albany inspector, he's
Right.
a very nice guy, but usually municipalities, there's no requirement for certification for a municipal building inspector. So, like
That's
the
what
town
we
of,
talked about.
town of Conway has no certified building inspector. They have none.
No building
Town-
inspector who is
It has
certified.
Correct.
So if it
So-
goes
He's
to
a town
credential,
employee, but not
He's-
certified.
Correct.
you don't have to have a
Van
credential.
Boring talking
No
about?
credential needed.
So that's
So-
the advantage.
So, and that's,
Is that why they have employees then, do you think?
I would suggest that that's probably the case. After my discussion with the fellow in Albany, I think that that's probably the same thing that's going on in Albany. And with my discussion through the fire marshal's office, everybody else has that same opinion.
Well, the selectmen used to be the building inspectors here
Well,
10 years
that's,
ago.
and that really, it is kind of like that,
So a town realizes that if we
I'd much
put this
rather have
person on
contract.
staff, they don't have to have a credential, and they don't have to take tests, and they don't have to show
You can always
knowledge.
change that.
I
You
mean,
can always say, like 2 years from now, that you don't want a contractor anymore, do something else. It's
Right.
more difficult to do the opposite.
Right.
To take
Take-
away employees
Yes.
and go
Yes.
back. That's a good point, too.
Well, what Andy just said kind of seals the deal for me. I mean, if I'm an employee that isn't capable, certified, that's not good.
And
Joe?
it's hard to find somebody too that will, we had a previous inspector who I got along with, and I thought he was very bright, did an excellent job, but there was an issue. I'm thinking if he was a full-time inspector, I can remember I had a customer that he didn't care for, and he wouldn't allow something that was legal to happen. 5 years later, I asked him, he denied it, but because he didn't care for this guy.
Mm.
And I think you can find that if you have a full-time employee.
I mean, I think we would be better off just doing a contractor to start, make that decision down the road. If that becomes another reason why you wouldn't want to be a contractor, then you could make that decision.
So if we were going to come up with a series of next action steps for this in the next 9 minutes, John, what are the things that we would want to list? I mean, it seems like the three, I don't know. What do you think? What are the important next steps?
Well, I think we
Solidify that description.
Right, I think we can look at the job description from the one you got from you just printed out here,
Yeah.
and then the what's in the book, RCI, right? Is it RCI? IRC. I wrote IRC, said RCI.
Timeshare there, Jim?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's
I'm
why
on
he's getting out of here.
everything that would fall under the
Page 2 and 3.
part of a contract, is going to be section R104.
Okay.
Page 2 and spilling over onto page 3 is the equivalent of a role and responsibility section there.
And then the third step would be to get a contract together, I think, after we get that developed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right, absolutely. Now, okay, and then see where we are at that point.
You got anything in it?
I think that's, because you can't really do a contract unless you know what you want the person to do.
Right,
So
right.
I think that would come later, and the person couldn't bid on a contract without knowing what they're going to do. So at least I'd do that one first, and I don't know, Andy probably has as much input to any of this as any of us. If you
Right.
want to draft to look at it, is, you know, what would work and what wouldn't work.
Yeah, I'll put a draft together for everybody. So,
What, a contract?
yeah.
Really? Sweet.
Well, job description or contract?
We'll do the job description.
Well, the job description is gonna have the same.
Well, it's going to have the same thing in it.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, I think we need the job description first, and then you can take those items and include them in the contract.
Well, I think that,
Pretty much know what's
if
going
you're
on.
looking at contracted services, it's the same thing.
Okay.
The
I
job,
got
The duties are the same thing, whether it's we're entering into an agreement with a company to perform those or a town staff person. And you know, that's not, and then that's not everything we want to do, obviously. We want to get a step-by-step process in place and formalized here about what's going on when somebody is coming through the door to ask questions. At what point does the business we're contracting with or the employee we have enter into it? How many of these questions are appropriate to try and answer at the town office window? At what point does a complaint get sent over to the business or individual that's doing the work? At what point is, you know, we don't want anonymous complaints being passed along and followed up on.
I think didn't we discuss that we weren't going to take any anonymous one?
Well, we did, and then Andy mentioned to me that we actually have a formal complaint sheet.
Yeah, the town staff's got a
So-
complaint sheet now, so.
We had town staff say, well, I heard from
Can't
somebody,
say.
and I'd really not rather share with you who. You know, that's not the open, transparent process that has the integrity connected to it that allows us to feel like there are no ulterior motives going on here. When a building inspector's being asked to inspect a property, it's because somebody complained anonymously because they don't like the person or they have some other motivation for doing that. That's the kind of thing we want to make sure never enters into the system.
We do
So
have-
Andy knows that, you know, I don't act on anything unless there's been a signed formal complaint entered at the town office.
Which we have new complaint forms for, specifically this building.
Excellent.
Not, it doesn't have the fire department logo on it, it just says Town of Jackson complaint form.
Right. And then that becomes part of the file.
And that's been that way since Linda Drench was here. I mean,
Okay.
she would only take, the town would only take written, somebody had to put their name down to be able to file a complaint.
That should have been the way it worked, but as you know, in the last 12 months, that was not the way it had worked in some instances.
Yeah.
And this gives us the opportunity to completely clean that up. Absolutely. So, I mean, there are other little pieces. They're not huge pieces. I mean, the key is, I think, these next steps that we're doing. So how do you want to do this? Do you want to chip away at it at future work sessions? Or
Well, we got,
Andy's going to kind of try and marry these documents together and pull the best out of everything and make sure that it's a comprehensive understanding of what's expected of somebody that's in that position. And he's going to obviously do it for free. He's not going to charge anybody.
Just like everything.
Or I charge us for a third of it.
Oh, that's,
'Cause that's what you
Yeah,
said.
there you go, there you go.
That's what you charge.
Yeah, that doesn't make it any less painful.
No, I mean, obviously,
I'll buy you lunch.
it's easy enough for us to
I see.
accept the bill for some
Yeah,
reason.
No. That's not a problem.
short money in the long run to get this stuff settled.
Yeah,
So we'll take it from there.
sounds good.
All right.
Tell me everything else, Ed?
Yeah, I'm really happy not to see the select board being dominated by one person. I'm glad to see all three of you working together. It's refreshing.
Thank you.
Did you want this back?
Yes. Joan, you have anything else? Hank, anything else? Ellen, anything else? All right, take a motion to adjourn the meeting then.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.